欢迎收听杂物间，
You are listening to The Storage Room,
你最好的口袋朋友。
your best pocket friend.
大家好，我是 Lindsay，
大家好，我是 Mark，
我来自于云南，织女为双，
我来自纽约，九曲十八弯，
我的事业毫无建树。
我和资本是轻车熟路。
今天我们请到了蛮特别的一个嘉宾，叫 Michael。Michael
是我们的这个 inspiration 对吧？
对，我们在1年甚至是2年以前在另外一个平台对话的时候，就是你我还有 Michael 我们3人在说话。这个时候我们的另外一个好朋友 CP 说，嘿，你们3人怎么不搞一个播客啊？当时这个做播客的想法就深植在我心中，我就觉得说，嘿， why don't we just do it, right? 然后突然间1年以后2年以后，是1年还是2年，这个事儿就终于就真正的启动了。所以如果说换一种角度来讲，我们只求你台不求真哈。今天有点像是这个节目的最初的这3个人又聚到了一起。 So welcome Michael. Hi Michael.
Hello, this is Michael. Hello Lindsay. Hello Mark. Hello everybody who's listening. My name's Michael. It's actually a great pleasure to be invited to this podcast. We are ordinary people trying to provide extraordinary conversations, and I'm going to do my best, and we're going to have fun, and hopefully you find our conversation interesting.
Absolutely. I have no doubt, because today's topic is a very interesting topic, and I'm actually have a lot to learn from what Michael has to say.
Yeah.
And what is today's topic, Lindsay?
Wow, the topic today is, it could be a little bit sad, but it could be very inspirational at the same time. It's about the family dynamics, So we're from different kind of cultural background, and we're from different kind of family background, right? So here we're over 30 or 40, right? So I don't know, like most of the time we just admit that we don't get the influence from the original family, right? We just say that, right? But I'm not sure whether it's true. So Michael, do you actually think right now, are you still under the influence of the original family?
Well, first of all, I'm not 40. I'm approximately in my mid-20s. So you have to take that back. You guys are older.
All right.
I'm just a young person trying to have fun and grow up. I do think, when you talk about this, I do see that very, very common that we see our parents as enemies. This family dynamics actually is possibly the most important relationship for a person, right? Because it stretches from your birth to your end. And there is issues of growth. There's issues of challenges. There's issues of value. There's also an issue of traditions, emotional attachment, and also, expectations and failures. So I think that if probably all of us with an Asian heritage, we all carry certain good and bad package, right? That we cannot really eliminate. But from my perspective, some of them, you do not have to eliminate. We do not have to trash our heritage. Now, family tradition is a very important part of our heritage, right? So we do see, as probably we know, Mark is a parent of a few. So let's touch on both parents' perspective and children's perspective as well, because that's sort of the best way to put yourself in other people's shoes, right? I remember I told you guys that this phrase that I like very much. When you're 8 years old, you love your father. When you're 18, you hate your father. When you're 28, you begin to know your father, right? And when you're 38, you became your father. And this has happened to everybody. Some obviously didn't grow up with their parents, but let's talk about those who grew up with their parents or raised by their parents, or parents who going to raise their children from their young. And that's a great responsibility from both sides, don't you know?
Right. Well, the first hint that I got from you is that I have to stop being binary most of the time. Like the silver lining always, right? For example, like I grew up in a family that most of the time the grandparents are doing the job and parents are always gone, always absent, right? And then somehow I learned to be independent at the same time. So that's a silver lining that you want us to see, right, Michael?
Obviously, yeah, of course. I think that parents have expectations, right? Children would grow to have expectations as well. And because it's biological that we already carry certain DNA from maternity, it's very difficult for most people to ignore that, right? You know, your mom likes durian, you know, most likely you're gonna like durian, right? They like spices, so you grew up eating spices. Now, values system is a bit more important. Your moral standard is more important. Your understanding of the world is more important. So you cannot ignore the fact that you are shaped by your parents. You can't. They are shaping you. You like it or not.
Right.
But I do want to, you know, Mark's input on this. Do you think your children also shaping you as well?
Absolutely. I think don't we say something about? There's a saying about, you know, when you have children, it makes you a better person, right? So in Chinese phrase, 养儿方知父母恩，对吧？ I think in many times, at least from my experience, my 4 kids make me a much better person, much responsible person, and it helped me adjust my priorities in life.
Yes. Well, as children, my take on this sort of heritage of moral value, and also my character building. I'm actually quite thankful. I have a very, very good family growing up. I like and love both of my parents. Like and love is different, right? you don't have to like a person to love them, and when you love a person, you might dislike them as well. But I just happen to like and love both of my parents. But in a way that I think that every listener here will share the experience of you are disagreeing with
But
your parents.
I'm sorry, but I'm wondering that why did you mention this kind of phrase, like, are parents your enemies at the first place? Like, why did you have like thoughts like that? Like for a lot of Asians, right? Like I am from an Asian family, so the parents are like they're more of the manager in this family. They're not enemies, but they're the boss, right? They're the ones who are gonna tell us what to do. But why do you actually bring up this concept like enemies? Why?
Because a good parent is a tyrant. Because of being a good parent, you have to command actions and obedience. Don't touch that fire. That's not a negotiation. Don't jump over the balcony. That's not a negotiation. Why are we soft peddling this early relationship between parents and children? You think a parent should negotiate with a child touching and opening the oven? That's not negotiable. The same apply when you grow up, right? Be a kind person. That's not negotiable. Don't hurt your friend. Share. Forgive. Right? Even smile, right? I mean, a good parent somehow, you have to be a tyrant at a certain age. Now, the fact that is the most important part is certain age. Up to which point? That's the good question. If you're not Not a
Well,
tyrant, you're not a good parent to a toddler. So hatred usually is very, very primal, isn't it? That a lot of people, the psychological effect on adults these days, especially in the social media era, they simplify everything that they object their parents into hatred. Don't you agree? That's why there is hate. But the hate is not malicious sometimes. In most cases, they're not malicious, right? I hate what my dad say. I hate what my mom did in front of my friends, right? That's real hate, but that's not a hate to murder, right? So that's why there is a hate, which is a mirror to love. If you don't hate, you don't love, don't you think?
so you're sharing the intensity. Love and hate shares the intensity of that emotion. Hence, you say that the hate is not the true hate in terms of you want to tear them apart, but in terms of emphasizing the intensity, right? But I'm still kind of puzzled in terms of you're using the word tyrant and enemy, because I think that is very heavy, at least for the Chinese families, right? We could never imagine to use those words or attach those labels with our parents. So how did you personally come about, in your 20s at this age? What kind of derive you to have those words to label parents and parents and children's relationships?
I think by now, I mean, you two know me quite a bit, and by now, every listener here for this beautiful podcast know that I am quite confrontational. I speak my mind. I solve problem on the spot. I don't cry and go hide myself. I do think that there's a negativity to that, but I think there's more positivity from that is communications. You have to tell them how you feel, right? Parents usually tell you what to do, but hardly any Asian parents tell you how they feel. When they actually do that, they're weaponizing it. You actually do not understand your parents. I mean, if I switch to the other side of the table, from parents' point of view, children have no right to say no. I know the best. I live 30 years more than you do on this planet. What right or knowledge do you have to reject me? Right? I work for 10, 15 years, right? I got married. I have relationship. I have multiple families, right? Including the in-laws. I have work relationship, right? As a 15-year-old, who the hell are you telling me that's wrong? That's a parent's perspective, which is real and solid, right? But there are a lot more things to talk about later on, but you have to confront that is reality. Parents sometimes dislike the children just because they're not submissive. But there's a strong reason as a dad to see that is wrong. I told you not to touch the fire, and I told you not to go out with that boy. And look at where you are. Look at where you are when you don't listen to me, who work 20 years more than you do, live on this planet 30 years more than you do. What audacity do you have to reject me?
So
But from
are
So
the
you
you
children's
mentioned
perspective,
earlier, about that you grew up with a very good family and you had a really right upbringing. But would you describe your parents as tyrant?
absolutely. My parents were tyrant. But I think that my example might be a good or maybe not a very good example because I'm a very verbal person, right? I'm a very verbal person. I tell them how I feel. I always tell them what I like and don't like. Always do. I'm not a violent person. You know, I love to talk, right? A lot of listeners now that listening to me for a few minutes, you know that I love to communicate. I enjoy persuading people. I love the reflection from my opponents. And my parents were tyrants, but the tyrants could negotiate, right? They are actually just exactly like how Mark described him as a parent as well. that if I communicate, my parent change as well, right? That they start to negotiate, they build trust, and trust is something I do think is very essential here. Do
But
you
is
trust
there
your 15-year-old to make a lifetime decisions, right? Do your as a children, do you trust your parent who know better than you do about job market, right? So there is a lack of trust, I think.
I'm trying my best not to be binary right now, but the thing is, do you actually think parents are always right? Especially when you make the the statements like, okay, so that you grew up in a family like this, right? The parents were tyrant, right? And then you learn a lot from them, right? But the thing is, do you think parents are always right?
I think nobody's right. I think nobody's right. Most of the argument or conflicts between generations are something that cannot be proven until later on. So let's not talk about eating chocolate or beef, right? Let's talk about career, marriage, relocations. Most of the time, I think, if not all the time, nobody's right because nobody can predict the future, isn't it? As a parent, I did, for example, Mark worked 20 years of his life. He know, 600 people. He had multiple interrelationship. He know people. He know how business work. He know how to persuade people. He know good from bad, right? But Mark's knowledge is 20 years old. I think that nobody's right because nobody knows the future. And most of the time, parents use their past, if not dated information, to judge the future. Nobody actually can predict. And children, at the same time, from their perspective, they should understand as well is that the intention of the parents persuading you on marriage, career, relocation, right? They had good intention, right? Like most of the time, they had good intention. That's very important. People forget that. But nobody's right. You need to negotiate. You need to converse, right? Parents, you have to get off your high horse and understand this is not 1999.
Oh,
Okay.
wait a second, Michael. Well, if you're saying parents need to negotiate, need to communicate, need to build trust, and that they're not tyrants, right? So if when you were at younger age, you were trying to negotiate, trying to resist even. So wouldn't you describe your relationship with your parents as like tyrants and rebels? So why negotiate? Why communicate? Why compromise?
Umbilical cord, right? Umbilical cord. When do you cut it? Among I said that up to a certain point, because at certain stage, parents best function as tyrants. But where is that line or in your age that you start to have your own personality and characters, right? We don't know that. Some is 12 years old, some at 30, they start to cut the umbilical cord. And I think psychologically, this is an issue that a lot of people ignore. You have to cut that umbilical cord because the umbilical cord not only transfer nutrients, sometimes they transfer toxins, right? So there is a point that you have built your personality, your understanding of the world, and you have your own value system, right? I mean, this is a very important question. When and where? How do you know you're ready? How do you know you know better than your parents, right? When? How and when, right? So a parent has to be a tyrant, but up to a certain point, you have to let go from the parents' point of view because you already grew up.
A tyrant never let go. Never.
I absolutely agree. I think the question is not when and what and I think the question is under the tyrant's rule, how would you even become or form your own value system and then decided to kind of resist and get away from the tyrant? I mean, how do you do that? You've lived under the rule for so long, right?
Well, I mean, if I'm a parent like Mark, right, you know that you're hostage negotiator, a referee, a therapist, all roll into one, and nobody give you the menu as a parent. So sometimes dictatorship and being a tyrant was the easiest and quickest solutions, right? And from parents' point of view, children are dictator as well. I want it now, right? I don't want veggies, okay? I want my chocolate now, okay? No, I'm not gonna sleep. No, I'm not gonna sleep. Children are also dictators as well, right? But I think I do want to talk about where and how you're gonna realize that you already have your character built, your personality built, your value system built. Then you should be a grown-up, start to negotiate and manage the relationship. This is not anybody's fault. A lot of kids just blame their parents and vice versa, right? I just have a stupid kid, or I have a tyrant parent, okay? They don't know crap. They don't know what they're talking about, and they interfere everything in my life, right? So when I said that parents are enemies, sometimes it's the same thing. Children are enemies as well. They come to spend money, took my food, right? And you know, most of my paycheck goes to the children who actually say no to me all the time. They are little dictators, right? So I want to talk about where and how you're going to know that you already built everything that you're supposed to equip to make your own decision, or actually at the beginning participate in those lifetime decisions, such as marriage, such as career, such as relocations. I think that's more important. I mean, what do you guys think? When was the time or year or age that you realized that, okay, I kind of understand this more than your parents? What do you guys think? When did you have to start to have that experience?
I would like to settle in the middle ground. In your description, it's always it's just going to like two extremes. It's either the parents are dictating or the children are dictating. But have you ever heard of anything called a family rule? Like the law in this family. Everybody's gonna obey the rules in this family, right? If there is a rule, and then we just try to obey the rule. That's all. Nobody's dictating. We just follow the rules and we just keep things running. We're allies. We're not enemies. Tyrants never let go. Nobody's gonna like grow up all of a sudden out of nowhere in the situation that he or she has never been respected as a human being. That's what I thought here.
Well, I'm gonna reconcile, right? I feel like at least Michael had mentioned a word which I really want to focus on. Sometimes I think what Michael had mentioned about certain kind of strategies that you use when you are educating the child would be a little bit more decisive, right? Without negotiation, that would be a tyrant. But sometimes, as he says, then we need to employ other strategies, you know, maybe love and caring and negotiation and settlement and all that stuff. So I think he's like overemphasizing certain aspects of that relationship. I guess I would never want to be a tyrant parent, right? I don't personally think that under my tyrant rule, my parents grow up to at certain point to realize, oh, I need to form my own value system. So I'm still very curious, like Michael, how do you think that under that, if it's an entire tyrannic rule, how do kids form their own value system? I just don't think that's possible, right?
Right.
Enemies with love. I think that there is a lot of instruments or means to communicate with people outside the family these days. I think in the old days, all you know is your family. Maybe your co-workers, the best. Now that we know the whole world, not the whole world, but you are capable of communicating with the whole world, and you have the capability to get informed, right? Enemies with love is an extreme, but we really have to realize there is a conflict in values. If traditionally, our grandparents believe the best actually is for people to stay in the village, right? Because we have assets, we have land, we have ways to live, and reproduce. Why are you leaving, right? Why are you leaving? Right? So they hold on to that. Those who had grandparents might agree. They hold on to certain things that we might never understand. But we should have our own love to trade with the enemies. They are enemies, not that you want to, harm the other side, but enemies in terms of value systems. I want my son to be a lawyer, right? Don't you think that's a very huge conflict as enemies? I want to be a painter, okay? No, I'm going to do everything in my power to make you a lawyer. No, I'm going to be happy and I'm going to be a great painter, right? That's not enemies. I don't know what, because that's your future. That's your next 50 years. If I actually allow the enemy to make that decisions, and I mean, parents, don't forget, you're not going to be around forever, right? So I do want to bring up responsibility, right? Responsibility actually is the key. Who is going to be responsible for these decisions? We have to take that responsibility. If you make that decision without taking the responsibility, you just, a very shallow argument. That's all. That's a shallow argument. I want to be a painter because I love painting. I love art. I enjoy representing what's good in life. And I'm good at it. I'm really good with colors. I'm really good with, art history. I love brush. I love the representation of sunset that I can transfer how I feel to millions of people, right? But from the parents' point of view, as the enemies, no, that is stupid. You're going to become a beggar on the street, right? Chinese parents, Asian parents, Indian parents, going to think that you're going to beg on the street, okay? What do you mean artists? No artist can make a living. You're not going to have a house. Paying what? You're going to pay for the tourists for $5? No, but again, they both right and they both wrong, right? But if anybody can take the responsibility for the next 50 years before they make that decision, that's the best way to analyze and get out of the enemy relationship.
So you're putting basically this enemy, you're labeling conflict of interest or conflict of the value system as kind of enemy relationships. Again, I want to go back to what we talked about. How do you, when children have no value system of their own, how do you help them build it? Isn't that, I mean, instead of dictating, isn't that better to provide resources so they can kind of test and try and then see what kind of value system fits them better? Because it's not one size fits all, no?
Well, I mean, read these books, right? You talk about resources, read these books. Isn't that a tyrant? I don't want to read that damn book. You talk about resources. You're providing information that you see fit. I don't want to read those damn books. Of course you have to be a dictator or a tyrant. This is a good book. It's going to be very helpful. Read this before lunch. You don't see that? But I think more important is that when do you realize that you're prepared to participate in those discussions that is important for you for the next few decades? I think that a lot of people still missing identifying when and how you're going to take that responsibility. Now, those who actually probably before end of high school, they, a couple of years before the end of high school, they start to think about career, what to study or where to study. I think that is very important time in a person's life to take responsibility. Now, how do you realize that? You have to get informed, right? You have to do your own research. You have to, dig inside to find out who you are, to prepare for what I just mentioned, the beginning of a negotiation, the beginning of building something on your own, and take, very importantly, the responsibility of the decisions. You have to get informed. You have to be educated, right? And at the same time, the tyrant has to realize that, okay, for more than 10 years, I nurtured this person, not a kid, a person. And I think that he's getting informed. He's building his own characters. He start to show that he understands why we care and how we care. Okay, so let him participate in those discussions and let's communicate, right? Now, I don't care if you're 16, 18, or some in Chinese society these days, even when you're 28, you don't realize that your parents not trying to hurt you, right? They're not trying to hurt you. They are probably with the best intention abusing you without realizing, right? Like I said, I'm going to do everything I can to make you a lawyer. So I'm going to probably, stop giving you lunch money or paying your tuition until you submit to become a lawyer.
All right.
But-
So, Michael, so here I'm going to give you a real example in my life, right? I am a teacher. I'm teaching a lot of students, and some of them may have psychological issues or even mental issues, right? And one of my students, right now she's a college student and she's about to graduate from the university. And she's suffering from different kinds of mental diseases right now. That's because her parents pushed her to do things that she didn't like. Even if when she was bullied by her classmates, her parents just kept telling her that you are being too fragile. You are being the snowflake or anything like that. They just use this kind of this kind of technique, like, okay, whatever you're suffering here is nothing to us, so you're supposed to suffer no matter what. And we are human beings. There's a very, very, very important part that those tyrants' parents are missing, that their children, yes, their children have zero experience, their children are new to this world, but they just forget about the part that their children are human beings. When a human being is being suppressed for a very long time, a lot of things will happen, like the mental issues, psychological issues, and then the kids, right now, the kids is about to graduate from university, right? And now, like, she's having a really bad relationship with her parents. At the same time, she just finds it very difficult to cope with daily life because of the mental diseases that was caused by these kind of sick and twisted kinds of education. So that's a consequence. You were talking about responsibilities all the time, right? So like you're just pushing your responsibilities towards me. Like, I want you to be a lawyer. So I'm trying my best to make you a lawyer because I'm your parent. I'm responsible. All right. But the thing is, it's always the children who are suffering from the consequence. Just don't forget about that. Children are human beings as well. Like, there's one thing that in our Chinese culture, right? Treat others as you would like to be treated yourself, right? I don't believe those parents would like to be treated the way that they treat their children. All right. So that's my take, basically.
I think family relationships' impact on mental health is very real. My heart goes out to your friend. This is probably a long-term effect on a particular person. Usually we hear the words anxiety, depression, and also identity issues as well, right? There's a short-term impact on the mental health of children, but there's also a long-term impact. And obviously you mentioned a long-term case. That cannot be one incident, but probably years of, frustrations. I think that's really real. And I think it's becoming, unfortunately, very common. I think at the same time, from a parent's point of view, I think that there is very real parental burnout, right? Parental frustrations. Okay, parents would, as a flesh and blood, parent would feel inadequate. Parent would feel incompetent as well. They're not pure evil. I think parents make mistakes most of the time without knowing. That's why I call them tyrant. They don't know what they're doing, which they're not supposed to, because God didn't provide a menu, right? So there is a psychological effect on parents at the same time, not just on the children. And this failure of the children, the parent would see as their own failure, right? So yes, you just, brought us back to tyranny, that there was no negotiation. There was not a very good conversation going on with your friend. And I think psychologically, that just like many we've seen on the internet, people internalize those conflicts and hold on to it. It become very toxic to their life. My life is over. That's sort of the most, the worst thing that we can hear from a person after an argument with the parents or family members. My life is over, so let's end it. That is not the answer, but it's a real issue of mental health impact from the relationship. Now, we don't have an answer to every case, but I think as children and also at the same time as parents, we need to see that as a real problem. There's a better way to communicate, right? That there's a better way to make a phone call. There's a better way to get your information across, get your message across, instead of yelling, screaming, giving order like a tyrant, right? We have to figure out both ways. Children are not perfect and parents are not perfect, but yes, it could lead to serious problems.
See, that comes back to the thing that I seriously want to suggest. For a lot of families, the parents are always the ones who are sick. Your children are not sick. Parents, you guys are sick. If you seriously want to make your children better, then try to fix yourself first. Your children didn't choose to come to this world themselves. You guys brought those kids to the world, right? So you guys are the ones who are supposed to fix everything, right? Especially yourself, to balance everything out. That's the parent's job, not to try to dictate a kid, right? And it's very important to have some kind of family rules. You don't want you to dictate your kid. You don't want your kid to dictate you. Have some family rules. That's all.
Well,
I think,
let me supplement with what Lindsay had just said. I want to focus on the word that Michael used, failure, right? I think the failure of the children is the failure of the parent. But then, you know what? The parents are lazy. You cannot use just a single-minded strategies and ideas on destinations and impose that on your children. Because once you do that, that shows your laziness not to explore different resources, different possibilities, different opportunities for your children. So I believe that, I agree with what Lindsay says. We need to forget about in terms of what children can do. We need to focus on what we can do. Don't be lazy about it. As a parent, I'm a parent of my own, right? I realize how much responsibility, which Michael mentioned, for me is to learn, to educate myself. What are better resources out there, right? If my kids don't want to study a book, guess what? I need to find other kind of strategies, other resources that kids do like and are acceptable to them in terms of learning. I think it's important to educate ourselves, not to just focus on what I wanted to do and impose it on the children. So the failure of the children is the failure of parents. I agree, but we need to concentrate on how do we not to be lazy and find out other possibilities so we don't make our children a failure. We make our children as successful as possible to be who they are, not to be who we are.
I think letting go is a very common topic, when to let go and how to let go. But in the meantime, I do think that Mark, listen more and control less. Listen more and control less. That goes both ways, but usually the parents should listen more and control less, right? Because you're taking the lead. Until they have their own job and family, the parents are always taking the lead. How the conversation is going to go, how the relationship's going to go, right? So I think the parent ought to encourage dialogues rather than a goddamn lecture. So the dialogue would be two ways, and both have to contribute, isn't it? that we should communicate or focus on communicating what the needs and frustration are instead of criticizing the children as rebellious. You don't know what you're talking about. You're 15, you're just rebellious. You just don't want to listen. You don't listen to anything. You don't agree to anything, I said, right? But I do think that we should focus, as parents, probably focus more on the children's needs and frustrations instead of calling them just being rebellious, right? This sort of sitting down, let's have a serious talk. I think that's wonderful. Let's have a talk, Tommy, let's talk about this, right? Can we talk about this?
Right.
But instead, a lot of, especially Asian parents, say, Tommy, what the hell is wrong with you? What did you do? Right? I told you, right? Probably Tuesday and Friday, what did you do? Now, that's very common and very easy. Like somebody mentioned, being lazy. Instead of, hey, Tommy, what's going on? Let's have a talk. Come, sit down, right? Asian parents don't do that, isn't it? Usually, they don't do that. Let's have a talk. Tommy, would you like soda? Let's have a chat, right? I mean, children sometimes just have to open up to as well instead of just, I don't know, closing the door or slamming on the furniture and calling your father a dictator. And that doesn't help. And those actually build up back to what Lindsay's friend that she mentioned, that build up, that you hold on to this sort of a violent, very violent frustrations, and that it build up after 5-10 years, you become a crazy person. And you hate your parents for no reason, even though you think there's a reason, right? I don't think any parents want the worst of their children, but let's have a talk, Tommy. I think, let's have a talk. I think listen more, control less. What do you think?
Yeah, I do think so. Like most of the time, the parents would be saying like, "Why don't you listen to me?" Right? But did they ever, think about like, hey, have you ever thought about listening to your kids first? Right? Have you ever thought about your children are human beings as well? That's all. Right?
But this sort of a communication, we need to bring up this sort of a technology and cultural shift as well. I think that when Mark's children grew up, maybe in 10 years, he would realize that you think you know everything that's happening in the world, which you actually don't. Your children probably know more what's going on in 2035, right?
Yeah.
In 2035, technology was different, cultural shifts probably very dramatic. Whatever political correctness or, whatever is going on, nobody can catch up. But you cannot stop your kids from growing up either. You cannot stop your kids going to meet people either, right? And parents should know that you have to be very careful not to be out of touch. Your information may be dated. I'm not saying value system would be dated, but you're out of touch with the world or the events or what's happening in school, let's say, what's happening in an office, right? As a white collar, you might not know. You have to have the awareness that most of the problem might be very current that they're facing. And you think that problem that you faced 25 years ago is the same problem that they're facing in school right now? Probably not. You have to be current. But I think in order to do that, you just have to sit down and say, let's talk about this. Like, what's going on? How do you feel? Like, I think, yes, we all describe children these days very entitled, this sort of unacceptable entitlement to certain things, which I think is mostly parents' fault, your fault, Mark. You provide too much. You provide too much material, too much love, too much room. And that's why you make them a very entitled brat, right? I mean, think about this. My father always tell me I'm very entitled, right? When I was young, how many miles I have to walk to school, You know how I make my money to pay my tuition? Yes, but that's dated. You can't use that past or dated situation in that, current problem conversation either. You have to, I don't know, get informed in 2035, Mark, as a parent. You have to, and you have to prepare that you might not be right either.
Right.
Absolutely. Absolutely agree with that. I think it is my responsibility as a parent to update my I cannot change my experiences, but I need to update my information that's more attached to the current trend, right? Current society. And I do see the challenge that I'm facing now, because think about it, like, let's say from 1949, when we established the country, to, let's say, 30 years later, 1979, really there is not much change, right? The prior experience might apply a lot better. But then when you are coming from the 1980s to about 2000, that's starting to change a little bit, right? The society progresses a lot faster, accelerates faster. But look at it now, from 2000 to 2010, from 2010 to 2020, things changes a lot faster, accelerates faster. So as a parent, I do understand that I need to have my ears to the ground, right? I need to understand what's coming, not in a way to in terms of direct the children what to do, but in a way to understand things are changing. What are values that can or will be changed? But what are the principles that won't be changed? And I need to focus on distilling that and then passing the principles on, not the values.
Oh, right. Right. Different generations face different challenges, right? We have to accept that, especially the parents, especially the older generation has to accept that. But now I'm a little bit curious about a even more complicated kind of situation. People from my generation, I was born in 1980s. So people from my generation, most of them are from the families that they're only allowed to have one child, right? So most of them don't have siblings. But I am quite different. I have a younger brother because I'm from the minority group. So now I'm wondering that would it change the situation when you have a lot of children in your families?
Um, it's actually mostly positivity. When people talking about multiple sibling when you grow up,
Mhm.
I think psychologically it's an early availability of group activities, right? Of group living. That you're not alone, you're not the only one, you're not the only, probably person to take everything. So group, or we call it socializing capacity. Um, but there's a negativity to it as well, that you fight with, such as our other friend grew up with 8 other siblings.
Mm.
And I see there's a negativity to that too. So it's not an absolute that you have sibling, you're a better person. You're a single child, you have bigger problems. I don't see that. I think that's very one-sided. That's very, very, single-minded. But yes, I do think socializing is very important, to work, study with groups. That's an early glimpse into how you're going to be independent in a society, right? There's big group at work, big group in school, and also that you're going to build your own family, which is, probably more than one member, right? More than your wife or your husband. You're going to have to deal with in-laws. You're going to deal with your children. So that's also social group as well. But you know, it's very important also to mention that it's very different now that we use the internet to social. We had this sort of illusion that we are socializing with people, and we sometimes forgot, right? That is very different from real life socializing. Very, very different. People are not that real online. They don't give you the true emotions. They don't even give you the true belief or identity. Even if you're a single sibling family or single child family, you are looking for social support. You looking for people identify with you, and you enjoy that. You enjoy that. But in a way that we have to be even more cautious in the future, that social media really provide a very different level of social experience and support. And people would get highly disappointed and even hurt with the slightest change or issues. And the emotional frustration is very harmful, right? We have to be very cautious about dealing with people in real life or dealing with an alias online. So I think that from family perspective, parents should participate more and prepare their children. For example, I think Mark's children have to prepare your grandchildren as well, because the social methodology or the social method in his generation or your grandchildren's generation might be shift from what we are witnessing today. So this sort of a emotional management, attachment, right? Even look, I told you that I have a great growing up, right? I love my parents. I like my parents, but that leads to another problems as well. Even when you grew up or after you grew up from a loving family, perfect parents, I'm not saying my parents are perfect, but there's a problem of attachment, right? So if your reliance too much on your family or your parents, detachment is another problem as well, right? Your family is not gonna follow you for the rest of your life. You have to let it go. Not just the parents have to cut the umbilical cord, the children have to cut it as well psychologically. So even with the successful and loving relationship growing up, you still have to let go somehow. You have to understand, like, for example, Buddhism talk about attachment, right? You are looking for attachment, but somehow you have to learn to detach. You have to learn to detach. You have to be independent, and you have to be, I would call it personally, an emotional support provider. You're not just, only sucking up psychological support and social support. You have to be able to provide emotional support as well. So I think that attachment with or from a loving family relationship, you also have to think about detachment.
I like what you said. I agree with it in terms of you have to detach from your parents. I think another way, I like the because it feels so abrupt, right? If you're talking about attachment versus detachment, it's so abrupt. It's either yes or no. Where I prefer to put it in a different way in terms of parental relationship with children as a very beginning stage where it's more of a codependent, right? In a way, the children are really totally depending on the parents to provide them the food, the shelter, the emotional support, and everything else that comes with it, directions and all that. But I would say that as we grow, as the children grow, then we grow into a different way of relationship. I like to coin that as an interdependent relationship, right? So each one is an individual of their own, but they need to have some kind of relationship where that kind of attachment still exists, but the intensity of the attachment, the essence of that attachment has changed. So I prefer to coin that as from codependent to an interdependent relationship. I hate the word saying detachment, as if that I'm cutting off my relationship with you, right? You are only my mother, as the word would say, you are my mother or father. But guess what? Your relationship is no longer important to me. I refuse to believe that. Of course, in terms of understanding the balance, the intensity, how do you kind of juggle that? That's to each of their own, right? But I feel like you still need to have a very happy life, right? I feel you need to have the attachment of your partner, your family, including your parents and your kids, and your friends, and your work professional environment. And all these are some kind of attachment to you. So I don't like that word detachment, to be very honest. I like to build a network of support, a network of attachment. So it's not unbalanced. It's a balanced support, balanced attachment.
是哦，你又不出家，你干嘛要 detach 呢？
对呀，对呀，我也这么觉得啊。我也觉得 我也觉得这个 detachment 好像就是
对，我听
六根
起来越
砍断。
听越不是味儿，越听越不是味儿。Like from my experience, I didn't have a very good relationship with my parents, right? But I have to admit that I do have the attachment with my parents. Like I care about them, and even though we don't call each other very often, but still I love them, right? Deep down in my heart, like I love them, right? And I feel that sometimes they love me as well, right? But the thing is, the detachment thing, I'm not sure. I'm not sure about that.
There's something called psychological long distance relationships.
Mm.
I think that is something that I like to talk about and dig in. As I said, umbilical cord, sometimes they transfer nutrient, but they transfer toxins as well. And I think that in our era of social media, the toxic information or toxic value system is actually more frontal, right? Central and frontal. And so long distance relationships psychologically is something that we should probably think about. What that means is that if you have a loving relationship, because codependent is horrible, right? We're talking about parents and children. We're not talking about husband and wife, wife and husband, husband and husband, wife and wife. No. Codependent is actually very harmful for a person to grow up. Very, very harmful. I'm not talking about eliminate the love and the trust, but I think psychologically, how you're going to be your own person, you're going to raise a family on your own, you have to answer to your own career, you have to pay your own bills. You should considering have a long distance relationship psychologically with your parents. I think vice versa, parents should cut that umbilical cord and let go. Codependent is very harmful, I think, in our era, is because you should not get emotional solutions from your mother. You should be providing emotional solutions and support for your children, friends, and yourself and your spouse. I think that's actually a harmful way to grow up. I'm not saying that when you're 12, you should detach, but when you become your own person and taking full responsibility in your life, codependence with your parent is very harmful, right?
So
Again, not the love and the trust, but I think psychologically, lifetime decisions, right? That you're sad today, of course you call your mom, right? Of course. But your mom shouldn't be there every single day at 24/7 because that is very harmful for you to become your own person and take full responsibility in your life.
So the detachment you're talking about is not really like cutting off from parents. It's just stop being a mama's boy, right, Michael?
A little bit more than that. I think I mentioned it quite a few number of times, Lindsay, psychological independence.
Well, I have no problem with that, but I have to bring this up. Okay, I have to bring this up. If you're not financially independent, you will never be psychologically independent. And in a lot of Asian families, even if they get married, even if they have children, they still need support from their parents most of the time. So they don't actually gain this kind of independence that you were talking about. And this detachment is never going to happen, I have to tell you, in a lot of Asian families, right? Like their lives, even the grandchildren's lives will be under the influence of the grandparents at the same time. I have to say that.
I see that as a reality, but then you're not your own person.
Exactly.
So if you're not financially independent, you shouldn't have any say. You're not a whole person. Then change that. Change it. Build your own value, build your own life, build your own income. I think everybody should do that. I think this sort of financially codependence do not make a good person at all. Do not make a strong person. Do not make a good lover. Do not make a good father. That's a shitty way to grow up. We're not going to talk about financial issues, much further, but you have to be your own person. That means that create your own means to support yourself and the loved ones, right? and one day maybe supporting your parents. That's what every boys and girls supposed to do. If you are a parasite, you have not much right.
I love the intensity of Michael's words, right? Parasite.
Parasite, yeah, that one is like,
but the meaning, I agree. But the underlying message, I do agree, and I think we do. I think three of us on the same line, right? In terms of gaining financial independence, and then you work on everything else, right? I do agree in terms of getting resources that you can support yourself, and then you are moving on in terms of other kind of independence, emotional independence, making your own decisions, all based on the economic situation that you create for yourself. So I think we are on the same line on that.
Yeah. And this episode is not really about like how to solve certain problem. We're just trying to search like, the inner reason, right? The reason there. Like it's like the elephant in the room. Like you seriously have to like look into your relationships between you and your parents, and then probably like you could figure out like why my parents are not allowing me to do things, why I am not allowed to do things, why I cannot make decisions for myself. So you seriously have to like value whatever you have right now and try to probably figure it out yourself. So I do think it's a very important process that you're going to experience in your life, right? So I guess that's a lesson that we have to take like in our lifetime. Like we have to work hard on it, right? We're still like at the very beginning of the show that we started to talk about like, are you still under the influence of your parents? Of course we are. So how are we gonna just make a very different life? Or are you gonna live the life that like your parents, and that's your decision and you're the one who's gonna make the call? I like the third episode that Shirley just said something about past and future, right? What happened, but the future is a thing that you can decide. And I think that's very important for us, right, Mark?
I agree. I think from this conversation that we have with Michael, I think what I have learned is that how I'm projecting my relationship with my children will be from the very beginning that my children are depending on me, right? From a dependent relationship to a codependent relationship where I'm really developing a very big attachment to them, where they are developing attachment to me, right? So it's a codependent relationship where the future is going to be that I have to focus on developing an interdependent relationship with them, where they are going to be an individual and I'm going to be an individual as a parent as well, right? I have my life to live, right? So I feel like that's like a trajectory that I'm looking forward to. And I do also like what Michael had mentioned about why use the past experiences to predict the unpredictable future, right? That is something that leaves me a great impression, because I feel like I had to learn to let go, to give the opportunity, give the space to the children when the future is not well known in front of us. So when and where and how is my responsibility. So I have a lot of work to do.
Yeah, me too. And thank you very Michael. Thank you for joining us and stay tuned. We'll see you guys next time.
See you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.